A few years ago, you released a CD of duets with your friend baritone Thomas Hampson. That must have been a lot of fun working on it for both of you.
Well, it's to say that it's fun only begins to scratch the surface of what our relationship has been about. Tom and I have known each other since 1982. We first worked together at the Opera Theater of St. Louis in a production of Così fan tutte that was directed by Jonathan Miller and conducted by the late Calvin Simmons, who
Really?
is the
Yes.
local boy
Yes.
here, and it turned out to be Calvin's last opera
Is that
before
right?
his tragic death. And it was an experience that summer was a real kind of a watershed experience artistically for many of us who were involved in that. And Tom and I particularly bonded before male bonding was trendy. Then we didn't see each other for several years. I think the next time we worked together was, might have been 1986 or so, when we did La Boheme with Leonard Bernstein. And from that point forward, our paths have continued to cross. Our friendship has grown. Our relationship as colleagues has grown. The genesis for that duets album, and I dare say for a collaboration which continues in many other venues today, was an appearance on the Boston Pops a few years ago. Must have been 1992, I think. We did an evening of operatic duets and some operetta duets, a little Broadway, and it was incredibly well received by the public. The rebroadcasts of that seemed, at least to us at the time, endless over the next 18 months or so. So our plans were already in place at that time to do an album of baritone tenor duets. Since the release of that album, we've literally been inundated with requests to go out and do personal appearances together and to do a program very much like what we did for the Boston Pops, very much like the two programs we did here in San Francisco area last summer.
Year, right.
Of course, there was the concert we did in conjunction also with Sam Raimi in the Opera House, but Tom and I did one at Stanford University, and where was the other one? Well, that brain cell is gone, but I know we did two together. And recently have just come off a series of concerts, one in San Diego and one in Dallas, and they've been phenomenally successful for us. Whatever the chemistry is that we seem to have together on stage, people seem to respond to it. I will say that there are very few people with whom I'd rather perform than Tom. Because we're such good friends, there is an element of profound admiration, love, and trust, which we have for each other when we're on stage. And I think both of us feel liberated and safe together, so that when we get on stage, something happens which is greater than the sum of the parts. This is a collaboration I think that's going to be lifelong, career-long. So we look forward to doing lots and lots of things together.
Well, we certainly enjoyed the series of concerts that you did here last year. It was funny, when you did the concert with Samuel Raimi as well, I was racking my brain to think, now, what could they possibly sing that would involve a tenor, a baritone, and a bass from opera? And I couldn't think of anything, but you did come up with a section from Faust.
There isn't really anything other than that trio from Faust. We were really racked to find things. The Kismet thing that we did was an arrangement that I put together originally just for Tom and me, but we figured out a way to work it for the three of us. And then There's Nothing Like a Dame seemed like a logical, fun thing for the three of us to do. But the options for tenor baritone or for baritone bass are much greater than they are for bass tenor or for tenor baritone bass. So you are somewhat limited there unless you want to do, well, I don't know what. But
right. Well, I was impressed that you actually found something that would work for the three of you.
Well, we tried. We tried.
You're in town right now as we speak to do a concert in San Francisco. Do you prefer doing solo recitals as opposed to opera, or what are the advantages of doing either?
When you talk about opera as opposed to any other kind of performing, I think that in one sense they have to be judged in and of themselves and can't really be compared, because sometimes the comparison really doesn't give full measure about what your own experience is as a performer. I love doing opera. I love being on the stage, portraying a character and being involved in that whole theatrical milieu. But I really adore the solo recital ambiance, because I love not being able to hide behind all of the trappings of the stage. Now, what I mean by that, I don't think any of us necessarily go out on the opera stage and say, oh great, I can hide now. You know, I've got all this scenery here and I can hide behind the character that I'm portraying, or I can hide behind my costume and makeup. But there's a lot that happens on the lyric stage that removes one from the audience. Because in a sense what you're doing is asking the audience to enter a world that you create behind that proscenium. And they're observing that world that you've created. You're telling a story and you're trying to portray one character, and you're going through a particular short focused period in that character's existence. All right? What I love about not having all that stuff around me and doing a recital, whatever the subject matter happens to be, is the fact that you really have to connect with the audience in a different way. One of the things that I love to do is to not turn off the lights in the house. I like to leave the lights up maybe even as far as half, because I like to look into the faces of the people to whom I'm singing. For one thing, I get a tremendous amount from them. I always arrive at insights, unexpected insights, and make choices in recital, largely based upon an inarticulable something that I get from the audience when I can see them. Likewise, because there's nothing standing in the way, separating me or separating any performer from the audience in a recital situation, it's just you and the music and what you as the performer have as an individual response to the music. And you're just left there to talk to your audience through the music. And that kind of immediacy, it's dangerous is what it is. Because
we're going to say only the very best can make that work.
Well, I don't know whether that's true. I'm not sure it's a question of being the best. I think it might be more a question about being willing to take that risk and running the risk that you may be rejected. Because, you know, when you're on the opera stage, if you're having an off night, you can, if you're a seasoned professional, you can sometimes mask some of the deficiencies of your performance because there's a lot of other stuff going on the stage. When you're in recital and it's just you and the music and the words, there's no place to hide. You know that old spiritual, there's no hiding place down here. I went to the rock to hide my face, the rock cried out, no hiding place. That's what you feel like when you're on there. But I think that's also a wonderful thing for a performer, to be forced into a situation like that where you really have to make decisions before you go on the stage as a recitalist that many times you're not forced to make to quite that extent on the opera stage or on the operetta stage or Broadway stage. And plus the fact that you are called upon in recital to assay a much wider range of characters, a much wider range in the course of one evening. It's that sort of multifaceted palette that is the stuff of which recitals are made that appeals to me too. And when you do it right, when you've connected with your audience in a recital, there's nothing that's better than that. Nothing.
Well, you're a very charismatic performer. The few times that I have seen you, there's definitely a magnetic personality on stage that comes across very clearly.
Thanks.
And so certainly looking forward to the recital that you're going to sing. You have a recording of Così fan tutti in which you sing the role of Ferraro. Tell us a little bit about that recording.
Well, it's part of a series of Mozart recordings that Telarc Records has done over the past few years. I mean, everybody and their dog has recorded all the Mozart operas in the last, 10 years or so. I think it's a testament to Mozart's greatness as a composer that he survived his bicentennial celebrations. I've been on two of this series. The first one that I did for Telarc was several years ago. We did Die Zauberflöte, followed a couple of years later by this Così fan tutte, all of which have been conducted by Charles Mackerras and with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra. This coming summer in Edinburgh, we're going to record Don Giovanni. I must say that I find and have found for my whole career that singing Mozart is always like going home. I think that what's amazing to me is within the parameters of a style of writing which is very precise and very transparent in many ways. You know, you can see where all the pieces line up, and it's a very structured and very easily analyzed structure. The amount of complex human emotions that Mozart can infuse into that classical style is amazing to me. I mean, who else can do it that way? The other thing I think that's interesting when you do a Mozart opera is that after you get over the initial fear of flying, when it comes to singing the arias, singing the set pieces, where you really have to have your ducks in a row to do it because you're exposed. But that's not the hard part in Mozart. The hard part in Mozart operas are the recitatives.
Really?
Because the recitatives are the places where you define your character, not in the arias. Not in the arias. Any idiot, not any idiot, but most idiots can stand up, myself included, and sing the arias because it's pretty evident what Mozart wants in those set pieces. He's so clear about what he wants. In the recitatives, though, because we, particularly as Americans, don't always enter the recitative process with the willingness to understand the language quite as fully as we might, we miss a lot of the character development that goes on in some of these pieces. Così fan tutte is one of the richest libretti ever. It's full of absolutely filthy language that escapes everybody. For instance, one of the keys, I've always thought, to Guglielmo's character, the baritone's character, is the first little aria that he sings to the girls when he's he and Ferrando are dressed as Albanians, And he is using incredible sexual double entendres to describe their virtues. He says, look at my bel naso, this great protuberance that I have here. Well, you don't have to be Einstein or Freud to figure out what that's about. He talks about, look at my occhietti. Well, occhietti is another euphemism in Italian for, the other part of the male genitals and things like that. Guglielmo, throughout the opera, is somebody who is concerned with the here and the now, the earthiness, the physical realm. In all of the things that Ferrando says, standing in stark contrast to him, the kind of imagery that Ferrando tends to use is a poetic, idealized imagery. And that you don't get necessarily from the arias. You get that from the recitatives. The same with in Marriage of Figaro. Many times I've wished I was a baritone when I've heard Marriage of Figaro because the Count has such wonderful descriptive stuff in Mozart, in those recitatives. That's where the drama is. The arias and the set pieces are sort of the soliloquy moments, but the drama is carried forward in the recitatives. And often when we mount opera and when we record opera, we tend to focus on the arias at the expense of the recitatives. I must say that with Telarc, I have found that I think they're brilliant the way they do these recordings because they always hire somebody to be the dramaturg. In other words, the person who keeps us focused on the fact that we're trying to create in the case of a recording, an aural drama, with no visuals. So the recitatives for us on these things take on added importance. I just find every time you go back to Mozart, you discover something new that you've neglected to see before, or perhaps you weren't ready to hear before because you weren't at a place in your life where you could hear it. The profound humanity that is in these works is just continues to boggle my mind.